The Arizona sun beat down, an unforgiving hammer on the parched earth. Elias Thorne, his face etched with the weariness of 100 solitary dawns, squinted across his land. The Lonesome Star, he'd called his ranch, a name that felt more like a curse these days. Every timber groaned under the relentless heat. Every fence post leaned a little more, mirroring the slump in his own shoulders. The cattle, thin and restless, kicked up dust devils that danced mocking spirals across the horizon. Water was scarce, hands scarcer, and hope, well, hope was a luxury Elias hadn't afforded himself in a long, long time. He was a man carved from solitude, hardened by loss, and clinging to a dream that felt like it was slipping through his calloused fingers. A flicker of movement near the dusty trail caught his eye. Not a rider, not a wagon. Something different. His hand instinctively went to the Colt holstered at his hip, a familiar weight. The landscape here taught suspicion. As the figure drew closer, silhouetted against the blinding glare, Elias's brow furrowed. It was a woman, walking with a strange, deliberate gait, her dark braids swaying with each step. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed out of place in this brutal land, her buckskin attire blending with the muted tones of the desert. He'd seen Comanche before, mostly from a distance, or in brief, tense encounters in town. They rarely ventured this far south, onto land claimed by settlers. He watched motionless as she approached the main cabin, her gaze sweeping over the struggling ranch with an unreadable intensity. Then she stopped, her eyes fixed on something just beyond his line of sight, near the old well. A sudden jolt of unease shot through Elias. He hadn't heard anything, seen anything amiss, but the woman's stillness, the subtle shift in her posture spoke volumes. He took a cautious step forward, his hand still on his gun. She turned then, her eyes dark and sharp as obsidian meeting his. There was no fear in them, only a deep, unsettling calm. With a silent gesture, she pointed. Elias followed her gaze, his heart lurching into his throat. Lying crumpled beside the well, partially obscured by a stack of old barrels, was a man, and on his head a sack crudely tied, obscuring his face entirely. A cold dread seeped into Elias's bones. He hadn't seen him arrive. He hadn't heard a sound. The Comanche woman had. Stay tuned for more of Elias's struggle and this mysterious encounter. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single moment of Comanche woman found a lonely rancher with a sack on his head. Elias moved, his steps quickening despite the knot of apprehension in his gut. The Comanche woman, silent as a shadow, followed a few paces behind. As he neared the prone figure, a faint groan escaped from beneath the sack. He knelt, his hand hovering. The material was rough burlap, smelling faintly of old feed. Who was this man, and why was he left here, seemingly discarded like a piece of refuse? Elias's mind raced, searching for an explanation, but the desert offered only silence and the distant cry of a hawk. He looked up at the woman, whose intense gaze seemed to be probing not just the scene, but his very thoughts. "Who is he?" Elias rasped, his voice rough from disuse. She didn't answer directly, her eyes still on the man. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, she gestured to the sack. It was an unspoken command, a quiet urgency that Elias couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and untied the crude knot. The sack came away, revealing a face pale and clammy, eyes closed and bruised. It was Jedediah Stone, a drifter who occasionally passed through, known for his tall tales and even taller debts. Jedediah was usually loud, boisterous, and rarely sober. To see him like this, quiet and beaten, was chilling. A thin trickle of blood matted his hair at the temple. Elias felt for a pulse, finding it weak but steady. Jedediah was alive, but barely. "He's been handled," Elias muttered, more to himself than to the woman. He tried to recall anyone Jedediah might have crossed, but the list was long. The woman knelt beside him, producing a small leather pouch. From it, she extracted a handful of dried herbs. Her movements were precise, confident, as she began to crush them between her fingers. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, a flicker of suspicion returning. He knew little of Comanche ways, and even less of their medicine. She glanced at him, her expression unwavering. "He needs water, and this will help." Her voice was low, a surprising melody against the harsh desert sounds, carrying a quiet authority. Elias hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Whatever her intentions, she had found Jedediah, and she clearly intended to help. He quickly fetched a canteen, watching as she carefully applied the crushed herbs to Jedediah's bruised temple. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, with the vastness of the land, and with the unexpected burden they now shared. With the Comanche woman's steady assistance, Elias managed to half-carry, half-drag Jedediah into the cooler confines of his cabin. The interior was Spartan, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a cot, and the ever-present smell of dust and old leather. He laid Jedediah on the cot, his own weariness momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected crisis. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, moved with an unhurried grace, fetching a damp cloth and gently wiping the dirt and blood from Jedediah's face. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the brutal circumstances that had brought them together. "He will need rest," she stated, her gaze sweeping over the small cabin, "and warmth when the sun falls." Elias nodded, grabbing an old faded blanket from a chest. "I appreciate your help," he said, the words feeling stiff and awkward in his mouth. He wasn't used to expressing gratitude, let alone to a stranger, and a Comanche at that. The unspoken tensions between settlers and tribes were a constant undercurrent in this land. Yet she had approached him not with aggression, but with aid. It disarmed him in a way he hadn't anticipated. She simply inclined her head, her dark eyes still assessing. "My name is Aiyana," she offered, her voice soft but clear. "I was tracking game. I saw him. He was left for dead." "Left for dead," Elias repeated, the words chilling him. Who would do such a thing to Jedediah, troublesome as he might be? "Did you see anyone? Riders?" Aiyana shook her head. "No, only dust and the tracks of 2 horses riding fast away from here. They rode west, toward the Devil's Teeth Peaks." Her memory for details, even fleeting ones, was impressive. Elias knew those peaks. They were a notorious hideout for drifters and outlaws. This wasn't just a simple robbery gone wrong. This felt more deliberate, more malicious. He looked at Jedediah, then at Aiyana, a strange sense of obligation settling over him. He was a man who preferred to be alone, but now circumstances had thrust him into an unexpected alliance. The Lonesome Star Ranch, a place that once felt like his fortress, suddenly felt very exposed. The hours crawled by. Jedediah stirred occasionally, moaning softly, but remained unconscious. Aiyana sat by the cot, her presence a silent, watchful anchor. Elias tended to his cattle, his mind consumed by the events of the morning. The tracks leading towards the Devil's Teeth Peaks haunted him. That area was rugged, unforgiving territory, a labyrinth of canyons and caves. To go there was to invite trouble. Yet the thought of leaving Jedediah's attackers unpunished and the mystery unsolved gnawed at him. He was a man who valued justice, even if it was rarely found in this wild country. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias returned to the cabin. Aiyana had a small fire going outside, a thin curl of smoke rising into the still air. She was roasting something over the flames, the aroma of cooked meat a welcome change from the usual dust. She offered him a piece. Venison, Elias recognized. He took it, surprised by its tenderness. "Thank you," he said, chewing slowly. "About those tracks. The Devil's Teeth is a dangerous place." Aiyana looked into the flames, her profile stark against the twilight. Dangerous, yes, but they left a man to die on your land. This is your problem now, too, no? Her words were direct, cutting through his internal debate. She understood the unspoken code of the West. If trouble found you, you met it head-on. Elias sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. I suppose so, but 2 riders. And Jedediah clearly took a beating. I can't go there alone. He was a capable man, but not foolish. Aiyana met his gaze, her dark eyes unwavering in the firelight. You will not be alone. Her simple statement hung in the air, a quiet promise. An unexpected offer of partnership from a woman he'd met mere hours ago, a woman from a world so different from his own. Elias felt a reluctant respect for her courage and a flicker of something akin to hope. The lonesome Star Ranch, starved for water and hope, might just find an unlikely spring in this shared quest for answers. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that by dawn his ranch would truly beg for him, for resolution, for peace. This is a pivotal moment in our story. If you're enjoying Comanche Woman Found a Lonely Rancher with a sack on his head, make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow Elias and Aiyana on their dangerous journey. The first rays of dawn were still shy on the horizon when Elias and Aiyana set out. Elias was on his aging mare Daisy, a dependable but slow beast. Aiyana moved alongside on foot, her pace surprisingly swift and tireless, covering ground with an effortless grace that spoke of a lifetime spent traversing wild lands. She carried a short bow and a quiver of arrows, while Elias relied on his rifle and Colt revolver. They were an odd pair, a grizzled rancher and a silent Comanche woman, united by a silent pact and a shared sense of justice. The terrain grew steadily more rugged as they headed west. Cacti taller than a man reached towards the pale sky, and the ground shifted from dust to loose rock, making Daisy's hooves click precariously. The air grew cooler as they ascended into the foothills of the Devil's Teeth, the wind whispering through narrow canyons, carrying the scent of sage and distant pines. Aiyana led the way, her eyes scanning every rock formation, every shadowed crevice, reading the land like a book. Her ability to track was uncanny. She pointed out faint disturbances in the dust, a broken twig, a scuff mark that Elias would have undoubtedly missed. They rode fast, she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. But they rested here. She gestured to a small, sheltered alcove where the ground was disturbed, and a few faint embers of a long-dead fire remained. Elias dismounted, examining the remnants. 2 men, as Aiyana had said. They weren't overly careful, suggesting confidence, perhaps even arrogance. As they pushed deeper into the winding passes, the shadows lengthened, clinging to the canyon walls. The silence of the desert, once comforting, now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken threats. Elias's hand drifted to his rifle. He felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, a wariness that had become second nature to him. He was venturing into enemy territory, not knowing who these men were or why they had targeted Jedediah. He trusted Aiyana's instincts implicitly, her keen senses a vital asset in this desolate landscape. The sun began its slow descent, painting the peaks in fiery reds and purples, and Elias knew they would have to find shelter soon. The Devil's Teeth would be a dangerous place to be caught in the darkness. They found a small, hidden cave just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. Aiyana, with her innate understanding of the land, had spotted it. It was dry, relatively sheltered, and offered a strategic view of the winding path below. They built a small, smokeless fire from dry scrub, just enough to ward off the chill that descended rapidly with the night. Elias shared his meager rations of dried beef and hardtack, which Aiyana accepted without comment, though he noticed her preference for the venison she carried. As they ate in silence, The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Elias found himself studying Aiyana. She was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. Her composure was absolute, her movements economical, her gaze piercing. He wondered about her life, her people, the stories woven into the intricate patterns on her buckskin. He realized, with a start, how little he knew about the world beyond his ranch, beyond the narrow confines of settler life. Suddenly Aiyana held up a hand, her eyes fixed on something in the darkness. Elias tensed, his senses on high alert. A faint clinking sound like metal on rock carried on the wind. Then the low, guttural murmur of voices. They were close. Aiyana gestured silently, pointing towards a deeper crevice in the canyon wall. Elias nodded, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. They extinguished their small fire, plunging their hiding spot into complete darkness. Creeping cautiously, they peered out. Below them, nestled in a wider basin, was a small encampment. 2 horses were tethered, and 2 men sat hunched around a larger fire, their forms silhouetted against the flickering flames. Elias could make out a branding iron leaning against a saddle, and a stack of fresh hides nearby. His blood ran cold. These weren't just common outlaws, they were rustlers. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Rustlers and Jedediah. It suddenly made sense. Jedediah, in his drunken ramblings, must have stumbled upon their operation, perhaps even recognized their stolen cattle. He wasn't just beaten, he was silenced. Elias felt a surge of cold fury. His ranch, his livelihood, was always vulnerable to men like these. The decision was made with a silent exchange of glances. They couldn't leave these men to continue their destructive work, especially not after what they'd done to Jedediah. Elias checked his rifle, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his hands. Aiyana nocked an arrow, her movements fluid and silent. They descended from their vantage point, using the cover of darkness and the uneven terrain. Every rock, every shadow, became their ally. As they drew closer, Elias could hear snippets of their conversation. Rough voices boasting about their latest haul, cursing Jedediah for being a nosy fool. The names they mentioned confirmed Elias's suspicions. The Slade brothers, notorious for their cruelty and their ability to vanish into the desert after a raid. They were a blight on the territory, and finding them here, in his backyard, felt like a personal affront. "We hit 'em fast," Elias whispered to Aiyana, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You take the one on the left. I'll get the other." Aiyana simply nodded. Her eyes narrowed in fierce determination. They moved in unison, a silent, deadly pair. Elias burst from the shadows, his rifle raised. "Hands where I can see 'em," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the canyon. The 2 men jumped, startled, reaching for their weapons. But Aiyana was quicker. Her arrow found its mark in the shoulder of the left brother, sending him howling to the ground. Elias fired, his shot going wide as the other brother dove for cover. A chaotic struggle ensued. The wounded brother wrestled with Aiyana, who moved with astonishing speed and agility, dodging his wild swings. Elias grappled with the second brother, a beefy man with a face scarred from old fights. Fists flew, dust billowed, and the air filled with the grunts and curses of men fighting for their lives. Elias was older, but his years on the ranch had kept him lean and tough. He landed a solid punch, staggering the man, and then brought the butt of his rifle down, knocking him unconscious. He turned to help Aiyana. She had disarmed the first brother and had him pinned, her knee on his chest, the tip of her bow pressed against his throat. His face was contorted in pain and fear. The confrontation was over as quickly as it had begun. They had them. Now for answers. The plot thickens. Elias and Aiyana have faced their first major challenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see what they discover next in Comanche woman found a lonely rancher with a sack on his head. With the Slade brothers subdued, one unconscious, the other nursing a painful arrow wound, Elias and Aiyana set about securing them. They used their own ropes to tie their hands and feet, ensuring they wouldn't pose another threat. The wounded brother, a man named Silas, was spitting curses and threats, but Aiyana's calm, unyielding presence seemed to silence him. She retrieved her arrow, cleaning it meticulously, her expression unreadable. "Why, Jedediah?" Elias demanded, staring down at Silas. "Why beat him and leave him for dead?" Silas spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. "He saw too much, old man. Snooping around, asking questions about our herd. We just taught him a lesson." "A lesson?" Elias's voice was dangerously low. "You left him with a sack on his head, out in the sun. That's not a lesson, that's murder." The other brother, Cole, slowly began to stir, groaning. Aiyana watched them both, her silence more intimidating than any threat. Elias knew these men wouldn't just give up information easily. They were hardened criminals. But Jedediah's plight and the sheer audacity of them operating so close to his ranch fueled his resolve. Elias began to search their camp. He found several sacks of gold dust, more than these two petty rustlers should possess, and a worn map tucked into Cole's saddlebag. The map had crude markings, indicating various isolated ranches, including Elias's own, and several other properties to the north. A cold knot formed in his stomach. This wasn't just about stolen cattle. This was a wider network, targeting specific ranches. Jedediah must have stumbled upon more than just a few rustled steers. He'd stumbled upon a well-organized criminal enterprise, perhaps even a planned series of raids. He showed the map to Aiyana. Her eyes scanned it, then settled on a symbol near a prominent landmark further north, a distinctive jagged mountain range. She pointed to it. "This is where the others gather, their leader. They have stolen more than just cattle." Her voice was quiet, but her words carried immense weight, confirming Elias's growing suspicions. The stakes had just been raised considerably. This wasn't just about Jedediah, it was about the security of the entire region. With the Slade brothers securely tied and the dawn approaching, Elias and Aiyana had to decide their next move. Taking the two rustlers back to the nearest town, Redemption Creek, would be a slow and arduous journey. Besides, Silas's defiance and the map in Cole's saddlebag hinted at a larger, more dangerous network. Elias knew that simply turning these two over wouldn't dismantle the real threat. The true danger lay with the others, Aiyana had mentioned, their leader, and the vast scale of their operation. "We can't just leave them here," Elias stated, looking at the bound men. "But if we take them to Redemption Creek, their partners will know, and they'll disappear." Aiyana knelt by the map, her finger tracing the crude markings. "This is not just cattle, Elias. They steal land. They force people out. My people know these signs." Her voice was grave. The land itself was being exploited, settlers being driven off their rightful claims. This resonated deeply with Elias, who had poured his lifeblood into the Lonesome Star. The more they talked, the clearer the picture became. The Slade brothers were just cogs in a larger machine, small-time enforcers for a more insidious power. The gold dust, the systematic targeting of ranches, the way Jedediah was silenced, it all pointed to a deliberate strategy of intimidation and acquisition. Elias felt a profound shift within him. What began as a personal quest for justice for Jedediah was now transforming into something far greater. He wasn't just defending his own, he was defending the very idea of settlement, of honest work, against those who would take by force what they couldn't earn. They decided to leave the Slade brothers tied, but supplied with enough water to survive until someone might stumble upon them. Their priority was the larger threat. They would head north, following the map's clues to uncover the full extent of this conspiracy. It was a dangerous choice, venturing into unknown territory, directly into the heart of the serpent's lair. But with Aiyana's unmatched tracking skills and her deep understanding of the land, Elias felt a flicker of resolve. He was no longer just a lonely rancher. He was a reluctant defender, embarking on a quest far beyond the boundaries of his lonesome star. The journey north was arduous, each day a test of endurance against the relentless sun, the unforgiving terrain, and the gnawing uncertainty of what lay ahead. Elias and Aiyana traveled with a shared sense of purpose, their bond solidified by the trials they had faced and the larger injustice they sought to confront. Aiyana continued to guide them, her knowledge of the hidden springs and ancient trails proving invaluable. She taught Elias to read the subtle signs of the desert, to understand its rhythms, a connection to the land he had never truly experienced before. They finally reached the jagged mountain range marked on the map. It was a formidable fortress, a natural stronghold. From a hidden vantage point, Aiyana pointed out a heavily fortified camp, larger than anything Elias had expected. More men, more horses, and a significant stash of what looked like stolen goods. This was indeed the heart of the operation. The scale of the conspiracy was far greater than he had initially imagined. It wasn't just about the Slade brothers. It was about an organized crime syndicate preying on the vulnerability of isolated settlers. Elias felt a surge of fear, but also a deep resolve. He looked at Aiyana, her face stoic, her eyes fixed on the distant camp. They were just two against many. He knew they couldn't launch a frontal assault. They would need a plan, one that leveraged Aiyana's stealth and his own experience with the land. Their objective wasn't to fight a war, but to gather enough evidence, enough information, to bring this syndicate down, perhaps with the help of the few honest lawmen left in Redemption Creek, or even a determined marshal. The sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mountains. The Lonesome Star Ranch, though miles away, felt closer than ever, its silent plea for justice echoing in Elias's mind. He had left it behind, a place that now, more than ever, begged for his return, for peace, for the promise of a future free from fear. The journey had transformed him. He had found an unexpected ally, a deeper understanding of the land, and a renewed purpose. He was no longer just a lonely rancher clinging to a struggling dream. He was a man standing on the horizon of a new fight, ready to defend not just his own, but the very spirit of the West. The outcome was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Elias Thorne faced the future not with weary resignation, but with a quiet, determined hope, a hope forged in the shared silence and strength of an unlikely alliance. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope you were captivated by Elias and Aiyana's story. If you enjoyed Comanche Woman Found a Lonely Rancher with a Sack on His Head, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the untamed West. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life.